John Keim, Commanders reporter for ESPN.com. Hello, John. Good morning.
What up, guys? How are you?
Hey, doing great.
Doing well.
I want to get you on, John, because I listen to your podcast. I love your podcast. Listened to it as I was driving in this morning.
Thank you.
And I think it was in reaction, a lot of it, to kind of Schefter's report that,
Right.
it may not be both of these guys, may not be Quinn in Seattle, may not be Ben Johnson, don't be so sure. And, around here, I don't have a horse in the race. I don't care who they hire. I'll just root for them, and we'll go from there. But we've all sort of assumed it's been John. Can you explain how it works? Because I know you're not a guy that's going to just throw stuff out there, right? You're only going to say something if you have a reason to believe it. And you and JP Finley, I put in the same way. Like, you guys have all just said, look, we don't know, but all signs indicate Johnson.
Correct.
So that tells me that somebody is kind of giving you that insinuation. Kind of explain how that works when you guys get information and how you kind of leak it to us.
Yeah, and so that's why I think people, and we're not the only ones. The others that I know cover this team have been the same way, where it's like, this is the expectation of people around the league. I think Ben and Nikki would kind of fall, and I don't want to speak for them, but I think until you know for sure, all you can say is this is what you're hearing. And the one thing to know here is this group has been very, very quiet in this process. So, and there's, so to their credit, and so that's why I think it's the expectation of people around the league. And, I and others have heard that for a while. Like, they thought it would end up to be Peters and Johnson somewhere. Not necessarily that they were a package deal, but I think they knew that Peters probably liked him. But, you still have to go through the process. And I don't see anything as being this massive lock. And it still may be that way, right? It still could be, hey, this is the guy they settle on. But until you hear it from someone deep inside there who say, yeah, this is the guy. Like with Jay Gruden, you knew that he was going to be the guy.
Right.
You knew that early on, right away. But with Ben Johnson, like, you clearly know they like him, and you clearly know he's a top candidate. But again, like, all you can go on is what people around the league are anticipating, because they're the ones that are talking a little bit more in this process. So that's why it's kind of like that.
So Harris's group is being quiet, right? They're being very tight-lipped.
Yeah.
Right? That's what you said, and I believe you. And you guys know to look for other avenues. So you'll call agents, or you'll call other people around the league, that sort of thing.
Right.
Where the hell is Schefter getting his info? Is he doing the same thing?
I would assume so. Yeah, Adam's pretty connected. And I don't know, listen, it could also be that people don't, and I don't know who Adam's talking to or not, so I can't speak for him. In general, sometimes maybe maybe you're hearing something like, hey, maybe it's just like, slow down a little bit because we still want to go through this process, right? It could be that. And what if they go through this process and they say, like, I always point back to the Steelers. The Steelers, the assumption there years ago was that Russ Grimm is getting this job. He's going to be the next head coach.
Right.
And then they go through the process and realize how much they like Mike Tomlin. And it's like, oh, okay. So I think it's as much about that. Which
I think is good. That's a good thing, and that's what I've advocated for.
Good.
Like, I don't want them to give it to Johnson just because he was their target. I want to give him to the guy that has the best presentation, the best plan, and they're like, we got to go with this guy.
Yeah.
Correct. If you don't do that, I know people are like, oh, you got to get the offensive guy. Like, you have to get the best head coach. And I understand with the rookie quarterback that you want, you don't want to be changing system a lot. So all things being equal, that's where you would go. But, like John Harbaugh has done pretty well in his situation, right? And there have been, other coaches who are.
Campbell's done pretty well.
Dan Campbell, and he's an offensive guy, but he's not a play caller.
No.
So you have to take the guy who you think can not only be the best leader, who's going to hire the best staff. Because part of the questions during this process will be, who is your staff? And, I know, like, I've talked to some people about some coaches in particular, like, I don't think this guy's getting this job because they didn't like who his defensive coordinator or his coordinator might be. And I'm not even going to name who it is, but like that they know that one of the coordinators this guy was going to take is not a guy that team would want. So therefore you take him off the list.
Right.
And because so like that's something that goes through this. Now, but I'm with you, like you go through the process, talk to all these people, don't have your mind made up. I do think, like with Adam Peters, for example, he was a pretty clear choice. They're their number one choice by probably a decent amount, right? And so, like, entering this process, I did not get that sense that there was this runaway number one choice. So go through the process, and you can say, I really like what this, like Ben Johnson's offense is really good. And he seems to be a very good communicator. And he could very well be the next head coach and be a very good one. But go through the process just to make sure. Confirm your thoughts. Confirm your feelings. Make sure you're not missing out on someone else who you might say, you know what, I really like this guy, but God, this guy blew me away. Because if you don't go through that process, then you're doing it wrong. And because you can make – and here's the other thing I know about Josh Harris. When he would go through decisions in Philadelphia with the Sixers, for example, or with anything that with any decision that must be made, you know, the GM will go to him or whoever, you know, Morey with the Sixers, whomever, and you have to go to him with all the information possible. He wants to know all the information. So if that's how you are with making a decision on do you want to trade this guy or not, well, have you consider this, have you consider that? So if you're going to do that to just make a move, if you're going to look for a head coach, you better have all the information possible to make the best decision. And again, like I always say, the expectation remains Ben Johnson. But, you know, and like in the podcast, I talk about, well, what if it's not? Then what do you need to know about these other guys? Why would they be looking at some of these other guys? Because, you know, they're not as touted as Ben Johnson. And, you know, we've seen other guys come through here. I've covered a lot of offensive coaches, and this team hasn't won in a while. So get the best head coach. And if it's Ben Johnson, then it's a grand slam because now you have a guy who you feel can be a good head coach and who understands. I mean, he's really good as an offensive coach. And I love, like, in some ways there's a complex simplicity to his offense, and it works. And now he has really good talent, but I think he makes that talent work too. So,
John, to your best knowledge, who's in the room for each interview? I would assume it's a lock that Harris and Peters are in the room. Are Myers and Spielman in the room while it's happening? Are Ein and Magic in there? We know they were part of the committee. Can you fill us in on that? Yeah, and I don't have all who's going to be in there, but I was told that Myers and Spielman would be still part of the process. Clearly, you know, Josh Harris, and I would expect Mitch Rales, probably, you know, Peters. So, but I don't know, like, how often is Magic coming in there? I know he was part of the GM process, right? And but I know that Myers Spielman still for sure are part of that process.
Hey, the guy I stumped for originally was Mike Vrabel. Can you just kind of give a little insight of why they weren't interested in him? They're interested in Quinn, all right, kind of similar guys, defensive guys, about the same age. You know, I think there's 4 or 5 years difference, but veteran head coaches, been there before, but they didn't interview Vrabel for some reason.
No, they and I don't know that I'm going to have a great reason why. I do know, like, for example, like there wasn't any interest in Harbaugh or Belichick either, and I think, you know, sometimes, and again in general, because I don't know what Vrabel would be looking for, but oftentimes it's going to come down to control and how you want your organization set up and what kind of power would the head coach want. And somebody in Vrabel's position might command more, certainly would command more than Dan Quinn. So I think like that is always going to be part of the process too. And one of the things I remember talking to somebody about this process is like, there may be a head coaching candidate who would rate at a high number, but if you don't think it's going to work with the GM and the coach together being, you know, in accord, then you're going to go with the guy who's a step below, but who can work better with the GM because ultimately that produces better results. So I think, and again, that's speaking general because I can't, but I think when you look at some of those guys, like I kind of fall back on that. Because that's why they didn't go after some others as well. But with Vrabel's obviously a very good coach and it seems to be a very strong leader. Yeah.
Talking to John Keim, covers the Commanders for ESPN.com. Earlier, you were talking about how these coaching candidates have to talk about filling out their staff. I don't know that we've heard anything about Adam Peters' staff and whether he's had time.
Right.
I'm assuming the Martys are still working, Martin Mayhew and Herney. And I haven't heard anything about Jason Wright. Is he still with the organization? What's going on?
Jason is still with them. He's obviously on the business side. So, I mean, he's not part of the football decision-making process at this point, but he's still there. And it's what I would say, too, again, I think Harris is a very deliberate decision maker. So I think this organization, it's not going to be when Dan, so you kind of look at I always like to compare the ownership styles. And when Snyder came in, I mean, he said he wasn't going to fire anybody. Within a few weeks, he fired a lot of people. And the makeover was dramatic, right? And it wasn't for the better. And so I think, but with Harris, it's a lot more deliberate. And so I think it's more just kind of getting in there and taking your steps. Like right now, the focus is clearly on getting the right coach, setting up this side. So focus on one side, then you're going to get to the other side, what needs to be done over here. So I don't know what Jason Wright's future is. I just know that he's not, he's just on the business side, period. But
with Peters, John, with Peters, I would assume he's going to hire an assistant GM and maybe, new player personnel guy, new college personnel guy.
Yes. And I don't know that that's for sure, because one thing I know, I don't think if anybody comes from the Niners, it may be just like some scouts, right? I don't think that he's going to take anybody from there. So I don't know what the final plans are for that. It wouldn't shock me. I don't know. I think some of them will stay. I don't know how many. I know some of them are down at the Senior Bowl now, with the scouts. And with Mayhew, I mean, he has a relationship with Peters from San Francisco, and so it wouldn't surprise me if he stays in some capacity because he does know him, and I think there's a respect there. So, but I don't know how vast that's going to be at this point.
So when do you think the I mean, it's purely a guess, but when do you think they're going to announce?
Well, again, the interviews wrap up today. We're supposed to wrap up today. Now, there's a chance it could spill into tomorrow, but let's say they wrap it up today. So this is just a guess, right? But, I could see them taking a day to kind of go over it, discuss it, whatever, and then Thursday morning, Thursday afternoon, maybe Friday morning, making the announcement. That would seem to make sense, because I don't think they're not going to want to make this during the Super Bowl week, right?
Right.
If you wait till later in the week, then you would want to have some sort of press conference early next week before the Super Bowl stuff really gets kicked off by like Wednesday or so. So that's why you could see it by the end of the week. I don't think there's no reason to extend it beyond that. Because I'll say this: if they're going beyond Friday, they didn't find their guy.
Right. Yeah.
And so that's why I think you take a day to think about it, discuss it, and then go from there.
Yeah, I think that's a good bet. Yeah, maybe tomorrow.
Offer. Yeah, and then so you have to also make the offer and start, whatever talks need to take place. So,
John, thanks as always. Appreciate the intel and the insight. It's John Keim at John_Keim on Twitter. Thanks again.
Thank you, buddy.
Thanks, guys.
All right, pal.
Yep.